Welcome to another chapter of In the Keep podcast. I'm your very own prophet of the drowned god, the Motherlode. This show is all about the world of first-person shooters, their legacies, their lineage, and the people who keep that world turning. It is the will of the drowned god Cathala that our communities band together to frag and jib one another into oblivion for all eternity. Our guest this week is James Paddock, and what an amazing guest he was. Like, if you're not familiar with him, he is absolutely prolific in the world of Doom. I can't say enough to praise this guy. Like, he's just a renaissance man of the genre, of the game, hustling all the time. An incredible musician. He is the MIDI guy. Like, he's done soundtracks for so many amazing projects, not the least of them being John Romero's Sigil, and also being like the person behind Adventures of Square, along with his brother Ben, Matt Tropiano, and a whole slew of other awesome people. But you'll get to hear the whole shebang here. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but just give Jimmy your love. Seriously, give him your love, give him your attention. Hear him out here because it's going to be a ride, and I'm super stoked to share this one with you. So music this week is by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. James Paddock, and this is from the soundtrack to Adventures of Square. Hope you like it, and without any further ado, let's get in the keep with James Paddock.
Ages ago, my dad had a very old computer, had a few floppy disks that came with various programs along with it. One of them being an old Windows 3.1/DOS sequencer by the name of Cakewalk Express. And this program was one of the first tools I really touched, I suppose. And it kind of fascinated me to begin with, even though I knew not one shred of music theory or how to write a song or anything of the sort, really. But it was very much something that I became quite interested in quite quickly. And I think once I reached a certain level of competency with it, I realized I was actually just hooked to this process of writing music. That this kind of came very, very naturally to me. Even if I knew I wasn't writing the greatest stuff imaginable, it sounded all right to my ears at the time. So I knew it was just a matter of time before I could really get my skills up and basically start writing my own songs. And so essentially it was just a case of me having a passing interest in music to begin with that just sort of gradually grew over time, just because, like with most things, I tend to just keep at them until I'm fairly competent at them, because I'm kind of averse to the idea of me having something and just not being good at it. You know what I mean? It's like I'm constantly looking to improve myself and looking to learn as much as I can about the fields that I'm interested in. So when it comes to learning like a life skill, I would call it, like music as a whole, like understanding the theory behind it and understanding how instruments work and like the scope of human playability, all that sort of stuff. I've been kind of on a lifelong mission, I suppose, to get as good at that whole thing as I possibly can.
So the computer MIDI was your first instrument?
Essentially, yeah. I did not play anything in like high school. I wasn't in any bands. Like, it's only in the last few years that I've really been interested in joining bands or ensembles. I suppose my greatest exposure to the idea of being musical in a social context has been singing in choir. which I did for 3 years over the last 3 years as of today. So I'm trying to keep it going, trying to keep the whole vocal part of myself, slightly warmed up. I do sing a little bit every now and then. There's not much that you'll find of mine online that has me actually singing, but it is like a side passion, I suppose. So separate to the MIDI stuff, I guess you could call me an instrumentalist in the sense that I have a vocal kind of side of me as well.
So are you talking like church choir, or just like you meet up with a group of guys at the bar and do you kind of...
It was at my uni, actually.
Okay.
At my university. So I had a really cool choir master, and he kind of sparked my interest in that whole side of things, like actually being in a vocal ensemble. It's a really powerful experience, actually. So I urge you, if you haven't listened closely to choral music, particularly like intently, I urge you to do that, because some of it's just divine. Honestly, it's a sublime experience being part of that. Quite emotional sometimes as well. So it was my university choir for about 3 years. At the beginning of this year, I also joined a church choir that that one of my good friends has been a part of for a good few years now. And she introduced me to the choir, to the choir master there, and at the moment they're on hold for obvious reasons, but they've been going for about 10 or 11 years now, and having just joined, I can see, they're a really competent bunch. They really have a good amount of fun there. So I guess that's really the breadth of my experience of being a musician in a social context, is what I would call it. I've also been in one rock/metal band before, and that was last year. It lasted a very brief time, but that was also good fun. It was kind of a power metal-y band that did original compositions. I learned about 5 or 6 songs of theirs on keyboard, and I played one live show with them, and that was about it. But it was good fun. So I'm like, as of this year particularly, I think what I'm really trying to do with myself is find more outlets for my music.
Well, let's put a stamp in that for now, and let's come to the other side of you, which is, how did you get into Doom?
How did I get into Doom? Again, it's pretty straightforward. I think it might have been that same computer that my dad installed Doom on. It was, I think, probably the very beginning of its lifespan. So 93, 94 is when I actually started getting into it. I would have been 2 or 3 years old at the time. So I had no idea what was going on, but I found the strange, violent images on the screen quite fascinating. So those old games have always been in my periphery. They've always been a passion of mine. They've been able to entertain me for years and years and years. So things like Doom, Quake, a little bit of like StarCraft, some other like retro, I would call them, games of that general era. They've always been interests of mine, and I would dare say video games today really don't take me. It's only Doom Eternal that I've recently downloaded. I would call that probably the only venture into the modern realm of video gaming that I've really dived into. Oh yeah, Duke 3D was another one. It was like from a very young age, I've been keen to create stuff for these old games. So for a long time, I made maps for Duke Nukem 3D. They were rubbish. I also made campaigns for StarCraft. Again, those were largely awful. But I think I really picked up steam when I picked up Doom, because Doom mapping is a lot more straightforward than editing in the build editor. It's not like a hugely different experience, but it's certainly, like especially with the tools today, it's so easy to make a Doom map. I think anyone can make a Doom map. I'm a very firm believer in that, and I've always been very, very fascinated with the idea of creating my own world within an old video game world, essentially. So, and mean, it would start. I'm pretty sure I started out by like making a version of my house in like the Duke 3D editor or whatever as a really young kid, and probably the same went for Doom editing. Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure I made at least one myhouse.wad with whatever Doom editor I was using at the time, probably Deep Sea. I feel like I'm in the general scheme of things, I was quite late to the party in terms of being part of the Doom community because I joined in 2006.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would, I guess, would you call that like the midlife of the Doom community? I'm not entirely sure at this point.
I became a member of the Doom community in like 2018, so I can't judge you at all.
Okay.
And I'm only 4 years younger than you are, so.
Oh, okay then. Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, it has been going for a long time now. All sorts of things keep coming out of that community. I still feel like I was a little bit late to the party, as it were, because I wasn't properly making maps for a long time. I dabbled a bit in the odd multiplayer community project here and there. It was actually the Skulltag forums that I joined up to begin with. And the Z-Doom forum shortly thereafter, and then Doom World, I think it was. So, I mean, of those three, I was definitely the most active on Doom World. I'm pretty sure. I just find Doom World like a really kind of a good space for things like discussion and critique, and like for young mappers to come forth and hone their craft. And there's all sorts of tutorials on there, and there's really helpful people there. Obviously, I try to involve myself with the community as much as I possibly can. And I always try to really involve myself with pretty much every corner of the Doom community that I possibly could. So I started out, as I said, with the multiplayer aspect of it, making small maps for small Skulltag maps for various community projects. I took part in speed mapping shortly thereafter as well. There were a scant few speed mapping sessions that were held on the multiplayer side of things. Can't remember exactly what they were called or who they were hosted by. The name will come to me immediately after the show, I'm certain of it. But speed mapping, I started shortly thereafter. I got involved in music as well, posting my own MIDI files again that I'd created with Cakewalk 3.1 or 3.02, I think it was actually. Yeah, Cakewalk Express. So I got involved with that, the music side of things. It wasn't until a bit later, so probably 2010, that I really started getting involved in the single player and co-op side of things. My flagship project, as people probably know, was Genesis. That was when I really started to pick up steam and think, okay, I've done a bit of practicing in the multiplayer side of things. I've made little maps here and there. I've made little speed maps, again, single player stuff here and there, but I haven't really committed to a large scale single player / co-op mapping project. I haven't really developed my skills in seeing a big project through to its conclusion yet. And that was really one of the things that I felt was missing from my repertoire for the longest time. So I guess since then, I've been kind of honing my craft and trying to find ways that I can see things through to their finish logically. And so this has involved like really kind of closely monitoring my workflow, writing it down here and there, planning stuff on paper, again, writing tutorials for people who might need to get to grips with that sort of thing themselves. Because, as I said, anyone can make a Doom map. I'm pretty sure it's an art that anyone can undertake if they just know the right tools and they follow the tutorials and they get feedback. They don't map in a vacuum, that kind of thing, and they involve themselves with the community because there is so much helpful material out there. So what I have kind of striven to do, like since Genesis, I think, is cement myself as a mapper more than anything else. That said, I'm also a very keen musician. Obviously, I've got about 600 songs to my name now. It's ridiculous. But yeah, so mapping and music, I guess, two passions that I kind of twin together. Like if I'm making maps, I'm also making music on the side at pretty much the same time. I find it really useful to be able to swap between the two, because there's often times where I just won't map for a good few weeks or even months at a time, and will instead just write music, and then vice versa. And I think it's good to have the interchange between those two skills, those two practices, just to keep me being creative and to keep the gears greased, as it were, just to keep me going.
Yeah. Well, we'll go through the short portion of the podcast where I kiss your ass and say, like, I've been a big fan for a long time. And, oh my God, you're so amazing. I love you. Like, I love your music, dude. Like, I actually annoy people at work because I listen to like MIDI music oftentimes when,
Yeah.
when it's like not appropriate. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
listening to it like it's this is a music station I'm listening to today. And sometimes it's your shit and it's good.
It's one of those things where people just don't listen to that sort of thing casually, which I realize is I realize I'm in a bit of a niche there, but at the same time, it's such a passion of mine that, and there's something about the wavetable synth that really gets me. It just it's just such a pure sound to me.
But Jimmy, you're so at the top of your game, like that your niche, you're so up there in that niche. Like how many other names can I really think of that are on your level? And I'm sure they exist, but for us, like for people who just spend a lot of time playing Doom or old video games in general, and like they listen to this stuff, constantly, not because they listen to it all the time, but because they listen to it while they're playing games. When they're not playing games, it's like, it's comforting. It sounds like music to them because they're so immersed in that world. And that's how it is for me.
Oh yeah. So. Like certainly, the retro style of game and the retro style of music, i.e. General MIDI, they go hand in hand so well. And I think that's why I've stuck for so long, because I'm just smitten with the pairing of the two, basically.
Yeah. Well, something you said in your monologue there was about how you try to provide tutorials for new people to get into this. And this is something that I also really appreciate about Dragonfly, is that he has a similar approach to things. And in general, I think that it's a beacon to the community, especially people who are just kind of tuning in now, like myself. Or I'm sure there's going to be a lot of young people post Doom Eternal that discover old school Doom for the first time right now, as I did with Doom 2016, as a matter of fact. And they're going to find your stuff and they're going to be inspired by it. And the fact the fact that you guys put forth the extra little bit of effort to just be welcoming and to give them that, that little leg up, like, here's what we've been doing for 25, 30 years. And, and catch them up to speed and make them feel immediate, not only just welcome, but competent, is huge. And that's a service to our community that not a lot of people are willing to do. And the people who do it deserve praise for, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a staunch believer in the idea that you can't really just do work. You have to be a likable personality as well, and you have to be patient as well. Because I find that if I listen to somebody's music and I later find out they're really not the nicest person at all to get along with, that definitely colors my view of not just the person but of the music. Like, there's an underlying sense of I guess trepidation, for want of a better word, about listening to their music. And I don't want to be listening with like a sour taste in my mouth, that kind of thing. So I want people to really associate my music with the person that I want to be, which is somebody who is, again, like helpful and welcoming, and is able to provide basically just love and support to whoever they come into contact with. Like, I've always been a person who really, really enjoys helping people, no matter the skill level. Like, I think chiefly one of the reasons that I started the joy of mapping was that I saw so many people that I really loved and respected having real trouble in just one or two areas of Doom mapping, whether that was just getting started or seeing a map through to its completion. And I was just like, there is a void here that needs to be filled. Like, is anybody actually doing live tutorials and like actual like Bob Ross style demonstrations of how to do X, Y, Z in the practice of mapping. And I figured, well, it might as well be me. If there's anybody doing it, I suppose I should start championing that idea that people can actually come to specific people and like gather in a sort of community setting to try and improve themselves. And I think it turned out to be just a massive hit, like a ridiculous number of submissions. On the last session we had, which was the Joy of Mapping 6, I think it was 72 maps that ended up in the compilation. So that's discounting the ones that had to go through like a process whereby I was like, actually, I don't think we can include this in earnest because, you know, you haven't followed the submission guidelines or whatever, or like the map isn't finished yet, or the map's actually not beatable, that kind of thing. So what I try to do with that is actually put them through a fairly kind of rigorous process where they actually do see something through to its completion. They spend a few days working on it, not too long, not so long that they get burnt out with it. They play around with ideas. They try not to like remove or delete anything. And they just plow ahead and they get over the finish line somehow. Like that's the underlying objective for me with that project.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot else to be put into that other than just the fact that it's good that you do it and it's good that you have that philosophy. I can't see an argument against it is the thing. And so the people, there are unfortunately people who are just like actively against sharing information. You know, they don't want anybody to be as good as them or that kind of thing. And luckily these kind of open source gaming communities, whether it be Doom, Quake, Half-Life, whatever, generally speaking, everybody's cool, or you can pretty much count on finding someone cool to take you under their wing upon arrival. So I'm just, again, going to say thank you for being that way, man.
Yeah, it's not a problem. It's totally within my DNA just to be like this, I think. So I just do what I can. I try to just be a nice guy, essentially just somebody that people can rely on and count on to help them out in times of need, and to just be a bit of a pillar of the community where I possibly can.
So let's go ahead and start digging into the content, which is way too much for us to possibly actually dig into in this, but you've released and worked on, and to be fair to your website, some of the stuff that you've worked on you didn't even actually list in here, which is crazy. Some of the so update that at some point, man. But like, yeah, you start off with Genesis, you go through, you've got Plutonia's MIDI pack, you've got all, you know, like the Joy of Mapping, unbelievable stuff here. And then that's not even mentioning like the big elephants in the room, which like, you know, Eviternity, which was a whole day on that. So actually I would like to, because we had Dragonfly on, what's your point of view? Like, what was your side of the story on Eviternity? How did you enjoy that project?
It's been a while actually. Like, could I remember exactly how I got to be part of that project? Well, I think Dragonfly and I have been buddies for a long time now, and we've done quite a few different projects together. He's mapped for me, I've mapped for him. We've kind of got this mutual kind of dooming relationship going on, whereby, you know, we are very kind of intricately aware of each other's projects pretty much at any given time now. So I think he first reached out to me because I think he was interested in me mapping for Skull Dash. And I think at the same time, he also expressed mapping for one of my other little projects, which was A Boy and His Barrel. Well, that the funny little Z-Doom mod whereby you carry a barrel that you are friends with through various hazardous situations and try to reach the finish line with the barrel intact. So what we ended up doing was that he made a map for me, for A Boy and His Barrel, and I made a map for him for Skull Dash. And well, I think we were both very happy with the results and with the kind of exchange that we had going on. And so I guess we just sort of became good dooming buddies from that point forward. So when Eviternity came along, I think he was probably one of the first people I contacted about that, because he wanted me to do mapping and music for him, which I was more than happy to do. And it was a real good fun being part of that project as well. It was, again, you probably are aware, done in a pretty short space of time, because that guy can map fast. I mean, and he's very good at project management as well, it has to be said. So so working on that project was real good fun. Using the OTEX textures by Yukiro was really good fun. They're just such a refreshing palette of textures, like really cool stuff. Very, very doomy, but also quite Quake-ish and nice and finely detailed. A lot of love's been put into that texture pack, so it's very easy to make maps with it. I mean, you've seen probably the deluge of stuff that's been happening lately with those textures. And on the music side of things, I did, 5, 6, 7 custom tracks for Eviternity. One actually ended up not being used. There was a bit of an undecisiveness about where to actually end up putting one of the tracks. So it's up on my website, but it's not actually in the final product. It's a track called Citadel of Might. That's actually ended up happening quite a few times now. I remember there was a similar case with Plutonia 2, that was 2008, I think. Bloody hell. I end up writing a lot of music, and not all of it manages to go into the final product. But that's neither here nor there, really. That's the sort of thing that just sort of happens from time to time with community projects. And Eviternity was no exception. That was just such good fun to write stuff for, and such good fun to map for. I ended up really pouring a lot of time and energy into that project, and I think it really, really paid off in the end. Because I have one map that is entirely mine, which I think is map 9. And I have another map that I did in collaboration directly with Dragonfly on, which I think is map 4. Both were really good fun to do.
So that I need to go ahead and say as a note here is that the way that I got in contact with you, because surprisingly, Jimmy, go on your website and you click on email and it does not take me to your email, which really frustrated me for a very long time. And then I finally just decided, like, you know what? I know Dragonfly knows James Paddock. And so I just messaged him. I was like, hey, can you get me in contact with this guy? And he's like, he's sitting right next to me. So super cool. And I'm really glad that we got that done. But there's something to be said about creative relationships, I think, in that when you find someone who you really vibe with, and that could be in a band, or, with what I'm doing here with this podcast, or what you guys are doing with like the mapping and the music and everything. When you find someone that you really click with, it says a lot, I think, and it can really take you on a journey that you wouldn't have gone otherwise. When you have someone that can push you to be better and do better, or to like take on new challenges that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. So would you say that he's like that guy for you, or do you have several different instances throughout your kind of career with that sort of thing?
I'm definitely seeking out new challenges all the time, basically. Constantly looking for new avenues to try my hand at. So whether that's music-wise, like if I dabble in a little bit of like a genre that I'm not familiar with, or undertaking like a new project, like an album-length kind of project. The 30 in 30 series comes to mind there, whereby I tried to write single MIDI tracks within 30 minutes, and then just kept going with that until I reached 30 tracks total. And I ended up making 3 albums worth of that, so 90 speed MIDIs, as I call them. And that was a lot of fun. The 4th one that I ended up doing was slightly different in that I spent the month of January 2016, so all 31 days of that month, just doing 1 MIDI a day, basically. I think for the final day of the month, I just did little tweaks here and there to the bits that I wasn't certain of. But yeah, I'm constantly seeking new challenges, and Dragonfly is just a really good source of inspiration for challenges as well. He's given me a few while I've been here with him, like little challenges here and there to like, hey, take your phone number and write a little instrumental piece using the digits of your phone number as the time signature. So I ended up doing that for him. That was good fun. He also showed me how to, like a video for how to write like a sort of metalcore-ish breakdown using dice rolls, and that was good fun. So yeah, he and I really just sort of bounce ideas off of each other constantly at this point. I've been overseeing a map he's been doing for one of my latest projects, which is called Isolation. So he's been mapping for that, and I've been there to see the process kind of unfold, which has been really cool. Isolation being a project that I just started a few days ago on Doom World to just help some people who might be suffering from the whole quarantine shenanigan. If they're like a bit bored, they might just want to make a really, really quick map. So again, that's another thing. I have quite a few different projects going on at any one point. One would probably say too many. But again, that's just me. That's just me looking for creative outlets, looking for things to do with my time and my energy, with my like creative energy that I really have to be kind of harnessing at any given point. Otherwise, I'm just very, very bored. So he and I really get along in that respect. You know, constantly undertaking new things together, and like in a community like Doom World, or just in the Doom community as a whole, basically, there is always something to take part in. There's always something to do. There's always like either somebody who needs help, or there's somebody who is running something really cool that you might just want to be a part of just for the fun of it. It's just such a good community to be a part of. It's honestly really, really helped me through life in terms of getting my creativity to the point where it is, and me kind of discovering my creative self, just that whole side of me.
Yeah, let's talk tools of the trade a little bit while we're on the music subject. So, are you still you're still rocking the Yamaha PSR keyboard, or what
Actually, no.
Okay.
Since moving away from Australia, I've not had that in my possession. Actually, since having the Yamaha PSR, I've had another keyboard, which was the Korg Crow, a really powerful keyboard, which I'm really sad to have left behind. So at the moment, I'm using just a really kind of piddly little MIDI controller keyboard. I wish I had something a little bit more substantial there so that I could actually practice on it as well. Because I am, people can praise my music, but I don't think they're quite aware of just how crappy a performer I actually am. Like, I can get the computer to do everything for me, and that's fine. But the moment you instruct me to sit down at a keyboard or a piano and just play something, like I couldn't play Fur Release or anything like that.
I don't think it matters at all. It's a matter of your art, ultimately the way that you present it and the intention you have with it comes across. It's like if you asked a rapper, like a really good rapper, like, "Yo, but can you freestyle?" Like, well, probably not. Not all of them can. That's a totally different art form.
Yeah, it's a skill set I wish I had, but performance has never been quite my forte, as it were.
Right.
Music pun. So again, that's one of the things I'm kind of striving towards, because I'm always trying to move forward. I'm always trying to look at like what I can challenge myself with and how I can improve my current self. It just it happens to cover basically any creative field that I can happen upon. And again, the Doom community is a really good place for me to do that in. So anyway, back to your original query, which is about music gear. I recently got a new laptop. It's an Eraser gaming notebook. So it's a computer I can actually run modern games on, which is really nice. I've been lumbered with like quite poor performance gear for a long time, just because I've clung to that old kind of retro feel. So even on the software side of things, Cakewalk 3.02 was presenting me with all manner of problems because I just clung to it so religiously, even though the program ended up not even being able to run on modern systems, like past about Windows 7 or something like that, or Windows 8, I forget. It just wouldn't even run because it needs like at most a 32-bit environment to run in. And the moment I made the transition to 64-bit, I was like, oh, I can't run my program of choice anymore. Well, this is going to be a problem. So what I ended up doing was actually I ended up downloading Oracle VM, I think, and just booting up a virtual machine on my computer at the time, just so I could run one single program. That had its own fair share of problems because MIDI input had an absolute butt ton of latency. There was a lot of lag. It sucked up a lot of my system's memory because, again, I wasn't using the most high-end computers at the time. Like, I'm pretty frugal when it comes to that sort of thing, so I don't go out of my way to spend, hundreds and hundreds of my own money on hardware, particularly. So I don't have like an impressive studio setup. I've never really had an interest in having that. I just use the tools of the trade that sort of get the job done, and to sort of work to a certain, level of, expectancy, I suppose. So, so the VM ended up kind of falling through because I started having problems booting it up and keeping it going. And eventually I just caved and swapped from Cakewalk to Sakaiju, which is a freeware MIDI sequencer. It's the absolute bomb. It's probably the best MIDI sequencer I've ever used. And I can't see myself moving away from that anytime soon. I've got a really, really simplistic setup now, just a gaming notebook, laptop, and a really piddly MIDI controller, keyboard, and that's basically all I need.
So there's not like a feel that you have like tactile wise where you want to, press a key and get a certain response or anything along those lines. It's really just for you, like, give me something like these.
I'm very software oriented. Like,
yeah,
if I go into a proper studio, like with a huge mixing desk and gigantic speakers, that really intimidates me. I'm not the kind of person who can really handle hardware rigs with just huge arrays of like knobs and dials and levers and meters, everything. So I try to keep it minimal, basically. I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with me still mapping for Doom all these years later. In a sense, just keep it simple and straightforward, and
it's like
retro if possible. Yeah,
it's actually a beautiful thing. It's like people who talk about, was it J.R.R. Tolkien or George R.R. Martin? I'm sorry.
Oh,
where he still is playing on like a DOS. He's writing on a DOS computer. Like he's got like
wow,
Word Mat. I can't even remember the name of it. Let's see, George R.R. Martin writing software. He's got a WordStar 4.0 on a DOS computer. Like that he's that's just, he's committed to that. And fuck you if you think otherwise. Like that's how he's going to write his books. And some of the best books ever created, I mean,
if you have something that writes words for you, that's fine. That's all you need.
And we're not going to tell him otherwise. So why would I'm not going to try to steer you in one way or the other, man. I think that if you found your system and it works for you, keep doing what the fuck you're doing because it's amazing. Like your art blows people away all the time. So let's move on to some other projects that you've worked on. There's that little one that came out in 2019 called Sigil. I think people have heard of that. Some dude named John Romero put it out.
Some guy, yeah.
But so this is an interesting project in particular because there's your soundtrack and then there's Buckethead soundtrack. And I'm going to be 100% upfront with you. I've only ever played the game with your soundtrack. But I've listened to the Buckethead soundtrack many, many times and I really enjoyed it. Like I'm a big fan of his as a guitar nut anyway.
Right.
So what was that? How did you get into that? That's got to be an honor in general.
God, yeah. It's surreal that I was reached out to by the man himself, honestly. Even now, like it's about a year on from that initial contact. with him, and it was just surreal. Just having John Romero, one of the guys behind one of the games that's still keeping me going today, just saying, "Hey, I like your music." Like, that alone is just, what the hell? How has it come to this? That kind of thing. So I was all too happy to help him out. I think he contacted me pretty late into the development or the actual releasing of Sigil, even though it did get delayed until about, what was it, June or July of 2019. But it was a bit late in the cycle, and he had to finalize the assets quite promptly, I think. So he reached out to me. He said, "Can I use some of your music?" I was like, "Sure." What have you gone with? He picked out a few tracks of mine from projects that had never really seen the light of day. So some of the MIDIs in my abandoned folder, which is where I keep all of the stuff left over from projects that have kind of fizzled out, or like the people behind them have just disappeared. So those are kind of fair game for anyone to use. And he expressed an interest in, taking, I think 9 tracks of mine. Yeah, because there's 9 maps. 9 tracks of mine from that general area of my catalog. I was like, that's fair. But what if we went with so and so here for like map 1? Like, have like a or map 2, I think it was, that I threw a couple of alternatives at him, and he seemed to like those as well. He was going for something pretty Doom-like and pretty specific, as I recall. But I think it was me who suggested, "Hey, here's an old speed MIDI of mine. How about we use this for map 1?" And that ended up being Hate Machine, which is, I think, the track that everybody remembers most. I've seen so many brilliant covers of that song now. People actually getting their guitars and covering that song, and releasing playthroughs of the music of the song on YouTube. And that's been really, really rewarding as well, just to see that happen. But yeah, Sigil was, again, quite the experience. I wrote a couple of new tracks specifically for it, namely the title music and the intermission music. Because John wanted something specific for those slots. Which I was all too happy to do. I think I knocked both of those tracks out in about 2 or 3 hours. It really doesn't take me that long to plonk some MIDI notes down and for it to start sounding good in my book. It didn't take long for me to finish that off. I threw them his way, and then basically they found their way into Sigil. Yeah,
so it was a really like interactive kind of collaboration where he took your account into consideration, like, "Hey, like, I think this might be better," and he was like, "Yeah, okay, cool." Like, it's gonna mean a lot more than just like if he just picked out a few tracks here and there.
Yeah, it was like his initial choices to me felt just slightly off. I was just a little bit cautious that it didn't sound quite right for me, because there were some really, really old tracks that he picked out that I look back on now and I think, "Oh, do I want that in like an official Doom product?" So, yeah.
I've got to imagine that in the back of your mind, at least, it's like when you're gonna have your stuff featured in something of that high profile, that you want it to be the best. Like, you want to really like show up for it in general. Like, you want to be represented in the best light.
Oh God,
a lot of people, you probably came online for them. The first time they heard your name was associated with that project. So to like wow them right off the bat must have, good on you for putting in the effort, because some people wouldn't have. They'd really, just take it. Do whatever you want.
Yeah. I definitely want to be somebody that people kind of see as somebody that they can. How do I word this without seeming extremely big-headed? I want to be somebody that people see as kind of a figure, like, of somebody that kind of knows their stuff, like knows what they're doing, knows their way around certain things in the community, so that I can be there to support them if they need it, and just a really approachable, friendly face, basically. I think that's the best way I could word it right now.
How the hell would that have sounded big-headed to me? I just want to be friendly and for people to know that I care about. That's the opposite of big-headed.
I just didn't want it to come across like, I want to be someone people admire,
Well, no, but I think the result of you not acting like that is what's caused you to be seen in that light, in general. Man, like I have kind of the same sort of complex with this whole podcast thing. Is like, I'm nobody. Like, I don't make Doom maps. I've never opened a map editor. I have no interest in doing so. I'm a fan of.
But you could. Are you interested in enjoying the joy of mapping?
I don't care. Like, I don't want to. It's not a pursuit I want to go on. I enjoy the fact that people do it, and I can enjoy that, and I can offer, my fanship. Really, that's what it comes down to. And I think perhaps I have developed a bit of a skill, although I started this podcast a year ago with like no idea even how to use like an audio editor. I had friends help me out with that, but over time I've found myself talking to people that I feel like I have no business talking to you. Like, not just you, but like, I've talked to like Fred Schreiber, Dave Szymanski, and and it's just it's an interesting thing where I don't feel at all like I belong here, talking to some of the people that I've gotten a chance to talk to. The thing is that I just want to be seen as what I am, is just a fan of the industry and a fan of the people who make these awesome creative things.
Yeah, so that's totally fair as well. Yeah, for sure.
There's nothing wrong with you saying like, I just, I want to be seen as an expert in my craft. Like, because I can't even say I'm an expert at podcasting or an expert at interviewing. I'm just trying to do the best I can. That's all. So good on you, man.
Cool. Thanks.
Let's move on to another really incredible thing that you did. And so at QuakeCon 2019, I was sitting down at a table at a bar with Human Bones, Dewsome, Bran Flakes, and Matthew Tropiano.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was like, just getting to know him because I never met him before. And I was like, what do you do? And he's like, well, I'm working on this thing. And I was like, what is it? He gives me this weird business card that I'm holding in my hand right now. And it's the oddest thing. It's an actual literal square for BigBrik games. And it says The Adventures of Square on it.
Okay.
So I take that home. I'm like, wow, this is weird. And I go on, I don't know, what was it, like the ZDoom page or something like that. Download it, put it in GZDoom, boot it up, and blew my fucking mind, man. Like, I couldn't believe how much fun I had playing through. I played through like probably the first and second episode in the course of maybe 2 weeks. I was on night shift, and I would get off, and like every day for like a solid 2-week period, early in the morning, people that watched my stream could guarantee I'd be playing through The Adventures of Square.
Wow, that's great to hear.
So, yeah, I want to hear the whole thing, and what a crazy crew of people you got working on this too. But we'll save that for after their initial pitch.
All right. I guess the initial pitch would be Adventures of Square. It's Doom, but in a sort of Saturday morning cartoon universe kind of thing, like a really kid-friendly kind of thing, essentially. Not to say that The Adventures of Square is strictly for kids. It's got its challenging kind of side as well. Like, we wanted to make something as fun and engaging and exciting and challenging as Doom. So we use a lot of the same design principles within it. Certainly you'll see kind of like equivalents for the Doom arsenal in the weapons, like the shotgun equivalent and the super shotgun equivalent, the chain gun equivalent. And the monsters as well. You have your basic troopers who are circles that you're blasting with paintballs. You are a square who has a gigantic arsenal of paint-based weaponry. And you're trying to reclaim Shapeland from the tyrannical reign of the circles, who have basically stood up and invaded and trying to just take over the world, basically. So that's, I guess that's the elevator pitch. The beginnings of the project, God, It seems to have several beginnings, this project, so I'm just wondering if I can like pinpoint the one that really matters the most. I suppose it started life way back in the form of a Duke Nukem 3D mod, which was essentially just me replacing the sprites with very pixely MS Painty cartoony variations. I remember replacing one of the medikits with a jug of lemonade, that kind of thing. There were cows. There were, what else? There was all sorts of stuff. It was all kind of silly and a bit all over the place because I was very young at the time. I don't know, 10 or 11, and I was just piddling around on the computer with little pixel stuff, replacing the sprites where I could. And and from there, I sort of thought, well, I know it's a long shot, but what if I could have my own total conversion that had all my own art assets here? And I think I started by saying, what if I was to replace every sprite and texture in Duke Nukem 3D, there being thousands, of course, with my own stuff? That failed rather spectacularly. So that project lay dormant for a little while. It did not feature Square at the time, though. Square came later. Me and my brother, Ben, do all sorts of stuff together. And we tend to go quite silly with things now and then. So Ben came up with this character just by the name of Square. It was a very deliberate effort to just create a very generic cartoon character that was just immediately recognizable as that, yeah, he is what he is. He's a square. That's all there is to him, basically. We ended up creating a few little cartoony kind of things together. We actually ended up animating in Microsoft PowerPoint, of all things. So we have a few instances of that where we were creating cartoons. We called it The Adventures of Square then. And it wasn't till a bit later that I decided, what if he was in a game? So I started putting some more assets together for that. Again, that didn't really get anywhere. Just because I'd set my ambitions really, really high. It was again going to be a total conversion kind of thing where every asset was replaced, every graphic, every sound, every piece of music, all that kind of thing. And on top of that, we didn't really have a setting for Square to be in either, because he didn't live in Shapeland. He just lived in this plain white void, basically, because we didn't know how to draw backgrounds. So yeah, that kind of fizzled out as well. And it wasn't until much later that I discovered, I rediscovered my love for an old game by the name of Lemmings Paintball. If anyone's played that, it's not really a Lemmings game. It's got the Lemmings brand on it, but it's basically an isometric shooter kind of thing. You have paint guns, and you're basically a blue lemming, and you're shooting all the red lemmings. I mean, that is essentially what the game boils down to. I remember really having a good amount of fun with it. It had a really kick-in soundtrack. I don't know if it holds up to modern scrutiny. There's a few games like that from my youth that I remember quite fondly, but I don't know if they really ended up playing any good. I just remember having some fun memories with them, which I guess in the end is all that matters. So the idea of coupling Square with paint-based weaponry kind of came out of the blue, but that was a marriage that just sort of worked, I think. That's where, okay, the ideas finally started to fall into place for what this thing called The Adventures of Square would be. It wouldn't be a Duke Nukem mod. It wouldn't be a cartoon series in Microsoft PowerPoint. It would be a mod for Doom, because I was modding for Doom at the time. What time was this? Maybe 2012, 2013 is when I actually really knuckled down and started working on it. So I kind of pulled all of the ideas that I figured would work into one cohesive product as best I possibly could. By the end of 2013, I think, I had a 3-map demo for what I wanted to be a big 3-episode game by the name of Adventures of Square. So I remember doing all the art assets for it. I pinched music and sound from various sources. Yeah, it seems a bit strange to me that I wasn't writing my own tunes for music, but my own music tracks for the game back then. But so all the art assets were mine. The levels were designed myself. I did all the programming. And that turned out to be a massive, massive hit. Lots of people got in to playtest it for me. I released the demo in 2013. It got a pretty good reception. And then I remember being contacted by a few people through the Doom forums and through IRC, all expressing a really, really keen interest in seeing this thing through to its completion. So I remember those three people they would have been Alfonso, Pavera, and Matt Tropiano, of course. Matt Tropiano, of course, being the who is now basically the project leader, the project manager, the lead programmer, lead voice actor, all that kind of thing. I mean, my brother, Ben, voices Square, and Matt does a lot of other voices for it. So from there, I guess the team really just ballooned, and it became very clear that we were going to be quite a tightly knit team working on this project together. And we managed to knuckle down, and I think by the end of 2014 we had the first episode finished, and that was Cornered by Circles. So the first episode of Adventures of Square saw a release, I think, in November or December of 2014, and from there we just realized we've got something really good here. We need to keep going with this. So let me think. Is that everything? I think that covers basically the whole story of Square's development from its kind of fetal state when it was sort of failed Duke Nukem 3D mod to where it is now, which is a full-on IWAD or IPK3, as it were, for GZ Doom.
It's just an incredibly ambitious project in general.
Oh yeah,
being a total conversion, everything. Right off the bat, I just want to get into. So now that GZ Doom no longer requires you to have a Doom IWAD, do you anticipate there being a proper, maybe monetary or Steam release for the Adventures of Square in the future, or are you going to strictly stick to the free-to-play model?
I mean, it would be nice, but I think we've said one too many times that we will not ask for money for this. It's really just a very, very passionate project of ours that we just would love to give to the community once it's done. That said, we are still kind of promoting it and treating it as though it's like a really independent, large-scale project, which it is basically. We bill it as an indie game. We probably won't release it on Steam, though. It's on itch.io, and we have our own website for it. So I think that's about as indie game as we can possibly get it at this point without putting it on Steam or any of the other gaming stores. But it is very much its own thing. It's very much a passion project that grew from a love of Doom modding, and I think that's still what it is at its core, basically.
You said several names already, but just to name a few extras, like Zazer is working on this, Rock King, one of the most prolific. Does anyone carry a mapping resume like him? I don't know. It's one of those names that just comes up in conversation, and people are like, "Oh my god, let me tell you how much I like." And just Cap J, this whole crew is just mind blowing, and I can tell. Go ahead.
We've got some of the most talented figures in the business, for sure. That's all I was going to say.
For sure. You've just drawn such a great crew. I could tell right off the get-go talking to Matt just how passionate he was about this project in general.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And you could feel that when you play it, man. The character design, everything. You said your brother plays Square, but you've got this whole kind of well thought out story that's easy to follow, even though it's still kind of true to that Doom. We're not shoving story down your throat all the time. It tells it through the game.
Yeah.
You got Dr. Octagon, the Circle of Evil. The puns in this game are fucking get out of town. I can't take it sometimes, but
I've always been a fan of the dad pun, really, the dad joke.
You just can't
Just
throw
the
some at
worse the better, basically. That's my philosophy.
And I mean, like I was gonna say the geometry, but even that sounds like a stupid pun. But just the actual level design itself
Oh
is
yeah.
mind numbing. Like how is this even Doom? Some of it is so good. I made sport for a long time of pushing cows into water on stream for laughs.
Yeah.
But it's gorgeous. Like it really is just a beautiful artwork. I love the color palette, and the enemy design. We have to spend at least a little bit of time talking about that. What was the kind of the thought process behind creating this story and creating these enemies and these protagonists for you guys? And before I get into that, that's you, Matt, and who's all's writing the story?
I think Alfonso and Zaza, story side of things. So, in terms of in terms of the original Adventures of Square, the original cartoons that Ben and I would do, they were just kind of silly and vapid. We just knew that we were doing something that was kind of deliberately a bit shit and basic. So it sort of like boils down to stuff like, there's a circle and he's a bully, and Square teaches him a lesson, that kind of thing. Yeah, it was fun to do all that kind of stuff, but that stuff would not easily translate to a Doom-like game, because if there's only just one antagonist, how do you make a Doom TC out of that, really? So I think the central concept was squares being good guys, circles being bad guys, was kind of just hovering in my head. I think I just settled on, essentially, let's make it like Doom, where human good guy, demons bad guy, where we're just a parallel of that, basically. Just make the circles kind of deranged and a bit kind of egocentric, like they're trying to take over Shapeland quite aggressively. They're enslaving the population, they're building robots, all that kind of stuff. They're building giant rocket bases to spread their influence to the moon, that kind of thing. And let's make Square appear to be the guy who's kind of he's just had enough of all this, and he's going to put a stop to the whole thing. So I guess in a way, Square is very much a Doom guy tier character. Yeah, we wanted to present it something that was easily digestible, for people of all ages. Like, you're the Square, shoot at the circles, or anything that's really just like that looks like aggressive and doesn't look like a square, basically.
If I may, now that I know this started as a Duke 3D project, it makes so much more sense why Square is the way he is, with the because he has these crazy one-liners that just pop up all the time. Like, that's such a good touch,
man. Part of that, here's the thing, part of that kind of wasn't the original story behind Square. He wasn't like a wisecracking FPS protagonist tier character at all. In fact, if anything, he was just like a voiceless character who spoke purely through his actions. Not like in the sense that he was just cold and calculated, like, Gordon Freeman, for example.
Right.
But he was just a cartoon character in like a really silly cartoon world where it was just the actions on screen that was really all that was happening. Like, none of the characters really spoke, had dialogue or anything like that. So he was just the center of attention, really, throughout all of it, without really having much of a personality. The center of Square's personality, I think, more than anyone, came from a guy called Slacks, who was a kind of supportive artist of the project right from the outset. So Slacks was doing all sorts of stuff, mainly on our Zdoom forum thread for the project's development, drawing these crazy, incredibly characterful pieces of fan art for us. Like he was so smitten with the idea of Square as just this wisecracking, fun-loving, slightly deranged FPS protagonist. And so, like, he had like a cigar in his mouth and everything, big bushy eyebrows, and so kind of like a cheesy B-movie style protagonist, I suppose, who also was, very good at what he did, and just a little bit, again, a little bit deranged at the same time. So I think it's from his work that we kind of developed Square's personality and his ability to how do I phrase this? It's from there that we developed Square's personality, like as an FPS protagonist. Somebody like Duke Nukem, Lo Wang, or whatever the fuck the Redneck Rampage guys are called. I don't know. So in a sense, people have then compared the game to Duke Nukem more than anything else. Like, it seems to be a sort of perfectly midway between Doom and Duke Nukem kind of game, because it has much more dynamic layouts by virtue of the GZ Doom engine's capabilities. It has a wisecracking protagonist. It has, proper story that is told through level design. Not that Doom doesn't do this, but I think Duke Nukem and its kin kind of did more with that. It seems to have been purely thanks to Slacks, and with a little bit of assistance from like the rest of our story writing team. So Matt, Zaza, Alfonso, and of course from Ben, Square's original creator, that Square is who he is today.
I don't think we really got into the enemy design, which was our original question. So I kind of throwing you off. It was my fault, but some of these enemies, especially like the robots, that you get really satisfying. I feel like it's easy to get lost in like the theme of it and the visuals and everything, and like lose track of the little subtle things. Like, you shoot them until they explode, and like just the voice acting and behavior of everything. And within Doom, I'm assuming that these are sort of like replacements for actual Doom villains, but there seems to be some really intricate playing around going on here with the enemy AI. So,
there usually is like a parallel for every enemy in Square. There is like a direct parallel for a Doom monster, because I think that's initially how it all worked internally. Is like this monster would replace this monster, and behaviorally they'd be kind of the same. So things like the Destructinator, the final boss of Episode 1, was initially the Spider Mastermind replacement, with his hit scan weaponry and all that kind of stuff. The Tritankle was the Arachnotron, I believe. Yeah, there was all sorts of crazy ideas that we had coming up with the enemies for Square. Like probably the most fun aspect of developing the ideas that would be central to the game came from talking about the monsters, because really you can take basically any shape, give it a face, and give it a personality, and then that becomes an enemy for Square. So like we had things like flying around like stop signs that would like block your path. So they would be like the octagon enemies, and they'd have like the word stop on their faces, all that kind of thing. We had enemies that would like run away, I believe. I'm trying to remember what those were. I think at some point we even played around with having like, I think I played around with having like punctuation mark enemies, like floating apostrophes with eyes, that kind of thing. That didn't end up making the cut, but yeah. So there usually is like a direct parallel for the enemy roster in Square, and I can tell you now that the whole reason I think that it is so satisfying to put an end to most of the enemies is because of the explosion effects and like all the finely tuned jibbing and smoking effects that they were initially my creation, but had a lot of fine tuning done to them. Essentially, the whole reason that all the enemies in Square explode into little paint giblets is because I was too lazy to make death animations for all the enemies. I mean, it's when I look at it, it's like, is there really any other way I could have gone about it apart from doing very boring? Oh, the circle guy falls over, and then like, I mean, that's not really satisfying. Not nearly as satisfying as blowing him into little bits, you know. Like, and besides that, the art style that I went for, which was very kind of pixelaty with the like, and they had little wireframe limbs and all that, so it just would have felt a bit awkward to do death animations with the kind of style that I was aiming for. So what I ended up doing was I ended up getting the jibbing system out of the way first, because I knew that would have to happen. There would have to be extreme deaths in the mod. But what I ended up doing was just keeping that as the default death state, just because it was so satisfying, just because I couldn't see any other thing working. And yeah, that's the story of essentially how Square's quite unique death system came to be.
I just think it's fantastic, and I want to iterate before we get out of here that I just really think that people who are generally Doom fans and that look at this mod saying like, oh, that's silly, it's for kids or whatever, like, please at least give it a second look on level design alone, and that you can't top some of this stuff. Like, everything is just so perfectly laid out. It's so wonderful, and everything makes sense as a you know, part of a prop in the story too. So I don't think it should be overlooked just because it's quote unquote like for kids thing. I mean, the main character is smoking cigars. It's not for kids. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a little subtle touch we put in there. Yeah, the adults will probably like this.
I dig it, man. Jimmy, you've been amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we call it a day?
I mean, I think I've given a fairly exhaustive description of kind of what I do and how I try to do it and thing. And I would just like to say, yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I'm sorry for talking your ear off, man, but big fan. I love your shit. Let's get out of here.
That's okay. No problem at all. Thanks very much.
All right, I want to say a big fat thank you to Dragonfly for hooking up Jimmy and myself to do this interview. That was awesome, man. Much appreciated. You're the shit, and I can't wait to see more from Proteus. Also, obviously, we're going to thank Jimmy for being on the show. He was amazing. I'm so fucking proud of this interview and just what we've done lately, man. We've been knocking it out of the park, like, with the names of the guests that have been on the show, and I'm personally super stoked, and we're not even close to done. Like, we've got more that I've already got recorded, and I just can't tell you about it yet. But hope you keep an eye out. Actually, spoiler alert, the next episode will be Matthew Tropiano, I think. So look forward to that. Also, we have a message from another Doom legend. It is Mr. Devastation. All you old school Doom 2 fans out there, there's going to be an announcement of an event soon. Not a tournament or anything, just trying to get as many people playing at a single point in time as possible. Keep your eyes peeled for more information being released this week over on DoomFederation.com. Really ask that everyone that can play does play. Get your chance to help prove that Doom is definitely not dead. XOXO, winky face, emoji, eggplant, heart, Devastation. Yeah, that's going to be a sick event. I already know what it is, and we'll be announcing a lot more details next week, so stay tuned. But, for now, hey, I just want to say a big fat thank you to everybody who's been supporting the show, all the new people that just got on board. I know there's quite a few of you. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks for your patience and for, just being a part of the ride. For all of you loyal fans out there, those that have given, that have donated everything, you know what it is. You are awesome. We appreciate you. Go to inthekeep.com for more ways to support. But until next time, stay in the keep.